Welcome to another episode of Come Together. We're live, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm well. It's a pleasure to meet you and to be here with
Yes,
you.
thank you so much for coming. Thanks for being so accommodating so quickly. Can you just give me a quick introduction? Tell me a little about yourself, please?
Certainly. My name is Andrea Korn. I have a doctorate, a Psy.D in psychology that I received at Nova Southeastern University.
Right here in our backyard.
Right, a long time ago in 1994. And then I was licensed in 1996 because you have to do 2,000 hours of postdoctoral training.
Mm-hmm.
And my journey to become a psychologist is not the traditional route. It was very atypical.
Really?
Very much
How so?
I was, my parents had picked out a husband for me at the age of 19.
Uh-huh.
So I was married at the age of 20 to someone they selected.
Wow.
Not that I wanted to marry. I had been at the University of Colorado. I was enjoying it. I was studying marketing. I was not thinking at all about psychology. I was an art history minor. I was learning to ski. I was enjoying the beautiful Four Seasons because we had moved here when I was started high school. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri.
Sure.
So I missed the Four Seasons. I didn't initially love Florida. It took me
It takes time to grow on you, by the way,
to
for
get
sure.
acclimated
Yes.
to hot and hotter
Uh-huh.
and hurricanes.
Yes.
So when this opportunity arrived that my mother had met the mother through card games, I was not interested. And even though I had met him and we had gone out on some dates, and I told my parents no.
Really?
And they literally flew out to Boulder, Colorado and told me I was marrying him and that was it, which I did. And on paper, I understand why. They thought this would be the right marriage, good family, very prominent in the Miami Beach Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
However, what looks good on paper does not necessarily translate into real life.
We know that.
So I tried mightily. They didn't listen, but I thought maybe I'll have children. That'll make a difference. So it didn't, unfortunately. So after 7 years of marriage, and I had a little boy and a little girl, I did separate and then got a divorce. And from there, I went into therapy because I realized a number of things about myself, whether too much of a people pleaser, didn't know how to stand up for myself,
Sure.
realized I had to think about a new career because I never had one. I was told this gentleman was going to take care of me for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't happen.
Right.
So I had to think of a lot of things. And plus, it was hard. I was sad. I was probably depressed. I was anxious. I was scared. I was 27, 29 when I got divorced with two little children, 3 and 5.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So I went back to school. I realized I had to get an education. I knew
Therapy
education was the way forward, along with therapy. So I started back at FAU. And through the experience of seeing a therapist, I realized, you know what? I like helping people. I like people. I like helping people. I'm a nurturer. So I decided I'm going to switch careers because I only had 2 years of undergraduate. And from marketing and art history, I switched to psychology, graduated with honors, and then was accepted into Nova, where I was able at that time, I don't know if you can even do it today, but I got my master's and then my doctorate all in the same, going through the same program.
Sure.
And then I did my internship at Miami Children's Hospital, which is now Jack Nicklaus Children's Hospital, because I knew having little children and being divorced, I really wanted to help parents and children, especially ones that were either having trouble in their marriage or were going through separation and divorce. And because I had had a lot of problems in the court system, I really wanted to try to help others who were in that process. And there were a number of occasions after I got my license where I did speak to judges and I spoke to attorneys a lot about helping them understand how to separate the psychological and the emotional issues, because court was really about the legal issues.
Yeah.
And back then, judges had no clue of developmental factors and how they affect children. And I ended up writing an article that I think in 2007, after he was put in the Florida bar, it was accepted into the Florida bar with another attorney, because I spoke to many attorneys at conferences about how divorce or how separation and divorce affects children at all ages, from infancy through adolescence.
Can you elaborate a little bit on?
Of course.
Yeah, I would love to hear about
So,
that. So fascinating.
so if parents separate when the baby's an infant,
Sure.
or one, say up to two, the most important thing is the establishment of trust. And how do two people that don't get along, how do they create trust for the infant? It's not easy, because one wants to do things the way he or she wants, and the other one wants to do things the way he or she wants, and they don't want to be told how to do it. But if they can somehow find a way to work together and stay on a schedule for the baby.
Right.
Because the baby cannot talk to them, but the baby senses different touch, different sounds, vocal sounds, how they're spoken to, how they're treated. So if the feeding, the changing of the diapers, the sleeping can be done in a consistent, trustworthy manner, that will help that infant, regardless of the fact that the parents get a divorce. All right?
Yeah, we're a little bit older.
So important. So the next stage, where you're getting into toddlerhood, where they want to jump and run, and children need, toddlers they don't like the word no, but again, it's all about keeping consistency. You can say, I hear you, Jonathan. However, it's time for your nap or time for bed. No, I don't want to. But it's learning to say the same commands. I understand you want to stay up. I know you don't want to go to sleep. I know it's still, let's say it's not quite dark out, but this is your bedtime. And the parent has to, at those ages, be more of an authoritarian figure. As you get older, it can be more authoritarian, meaning there's give and take, but they have to set rules and discipline and be consistent. So if one parent is saying one thing, I don't care how late he or she stays up, and the other one's saying no, bedtime is 7 o'clock, there's going to be problems.
When I was growing up, my siblings and I, I'm the oldest of six, and inevitably we'd all fight, and my parents had sure, and my parents, and we came to expect it, and we still laugh about it to today. My mom, one of us will cross a line. Generally, probably was me. You'd cross as the oldest, and then and my mom would immediately go, "Get to your room," and I'd huff and I'd puff and I'd walk upstairs. And then halfway up the stairs, my dad, and I'd be crying, or someone would be crying. And then my dad, halfway up the stairs, my dad would go, "Get down here." Okay. And then I go down, he goes, "What happened?" And my mom's like, "What are you doing down here? I just sent you upstairs." And there was and thank God my parents.
Fortunately, they got it together. The mixed messages is what can be very confusing. Plus, many divorced parents don't want to be told what to do by the spouse that they're divorced from. Yeah. So intentionally, sometimes they will do no, I'm not putting him to bed, or I'm not putting her to bed at 7 p.m. I'll put her to bed when I want to.
Yeah.
Because, and what do toddlers get into? Power struggles.
Yes. Yes, I've noticed that. I have a 5-year-old, a brother-in-law, and a 2-year-old.
Yeah. So power struggles are normal, but instead of getting into the argument and arguing or trying to, you can't reason with a toddler.
Sure.
You have to just say, I know you're angry, I know you're disappointed, but I'm the adult, and these are the rules.
Right.
So with toddlers, it's really trying to help the parents see their role, and that they don't have to like each other, they don't have to get along, but if for the welfare and the benefit of their child, if they can create this safety of consistency. Consistency is very important.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, because temperamentally, if these parents have, let's say, not gone into therapy, they may not want to cooperate.
Right.
And they may not want to comply or help the other one out. Why would I want to help her out? She left me,
Worse than that, you might want to do it on purpose, just to get at them,
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
So it's a challenge. It's not easy, but if you can instruct and guide and explain how much more problematic it's going to be later on. It's not about getting along, but it's doing the right thing for your child. It's creating guardrails. It's creating boundaries. It's
structure.
Yes, because that's what it's like in society. We have stop signs, we have red lights. There has to be rules, there has to be discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, none of it's ever going to be perfect, but the more you can try to say, all right, I know I don't want to really work with you, but I understand for the benefit of my son or daughter or my children, I will
But
try.
that might require a whole nother psychological understanding of the people actually,
Well,
the two parties, the two parents.
it is complicated, and you end up really working with the parents.
Right.
They'll want to bring the child because the child often is the identified patient, but the child really is taking his or her cues from the
Sure.
parent.
Right.
And so it is complicated. In those years, often, why do you think they have trouble with toilet training or temper tantrums?
Yeah. So this could be from anywhere from like 3 to 7 or 8.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right. And you'll see it manifest in behaviors,
Sure.
whether the externalizing behavior, like I said, the temper tantrum, or not wanting to toilet train, or sometimes you'll see kids that are too good because they don't want the parents to fight, or they're trying to get them to make up, so they'll do whatever the parent wants.
Yeah.
Or you'll see the child like shut down or be very depressed, and then that could manifest in regressions in sleeping or eating or play, and those need to be addressed because the child may be afraid or not know how to talk about his or her feelings, but it comes out in other ways.
Right.
All right. So again, so much of it is about educating parents about child development and helping them understand that even though you may not be with the man or the woman that helped create this child, you have a responsibility, hopefully, to co-parent.
Yeah.
Or to try to co-parent the best you can together for the benefit and well-being of your child. Because sometimes the problems can, you'll get a phone call. The problems could be in school or the problems could be in one home. And sometimes it's a cry for help. It's a cry for attention because that child wants to try to either bring the parents together or they're not being heard. And there is an issue that does need to be addressed, that the feelings can't be dismissed or ignored. They need to be discussed. And that maybe there is a reason why this child is crying a lot or is very angry and wants to break things all the time. And so it's really trying to understand what's really going on to help not only the child, but to help the parents.
And then it gets more complicated as they get into teenage years and as they get older.
Of course
right?
it does, because adolescents want to start to have more independence or start to carve out their own sense of freedom or individuality, and they don't want to conform necessarily to what the mother or the father is saying, and yet you have to know how to balance that by being able to hear them. But no, you're not staying out till 1 o'clock, but I understand you want to see your friends and you have to be home by say 10 or whatever it may be.
So it's validation and reinforcement, I guess.
Right, acknowledgement, validation, reinforcement, and listening and saying, I know this upset you. I know you're mad. I know you wanted to go to this party or you wanted to go to this carnival that they're having for Purim or whatever. But no, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable and you're not going to be able to. Does it mean it's going to be easy? No. Does that mean they're going to be arguing or crying or, I'm not talking to you and slamming the door? Absolutely. But sometimes the parent has to realize that, all right, they're mad. It's okay. They have every right to be, but it doesn't mean I'm giving in.
Right.
It doesn't mean just if I give in that that's the right answer.
Right.
So parents have to stick to their guns and they have to be consistent. It's almost better to err on the side of consistency than being too permissive or wishy-washy, because if the child never knows that the parent's going to say yes or no, that creates insecurity and doubt.
Sure. When do kids stop, or I don't know if they ever do, when do kids stop trying to test? Like, I know, like we said, that they start pushing limits and testing boundaries. Do people ever stop, or is there a typical age?
Question. I don't know if they ever stop.
Right.
Especially if they're living under their parents' home. Because, there's a certain respect. You want to listen and be courteous and respectful, but at the same time, you want to do what you want to do, too. And it's a lot of times it turns into, as they get older, more of a negotiation.
Yeah.
I know you want to use a car, but then you must bring the car home by whatever time and make sure it has at least a half a tank of gas or something.
Definitely.
So, and it just depends on the parent. And, some parents think that, oh, I'll be my child's best friend and that'll be great, but it really isn't, because what it's doing is creating the parent and child as if they're equal. Well, the child shouldn't be making the decisions. When parents elevate their child to the adult status, in a way, it creates more anxiety and insecurity for that child, because they can't be the ones to make and enforce the rules.
Right.
So permissive parenting is really detrimental. And so is too harsh authoritarian parent, like it's my way or the highway.
Right.
That also leads to a lot of significant conflict. So it's called authoritative, which is, yes, you're the adult, but there are times you're going to bend the rules and you're going to say, I understand this one time.
Sure.
Or because it's your best friend's birthday party, but you
Yeah.
explain it.
Sure.
It's not a hard and fast, it's not a one size fits all. And it's not like, oh, but I want them to be my friend. I never want my child to be mad at me. That's unrealistic.
Right. Right.
And it's really not good parenting.
We all know that when my dad says "do whatever you want," that it's the last thing that he really means,
Right.
And then that's like the final no, because at a certain point we bicker back and forth, and then he'll say, "You know what? Do whatever you want." And like whenever we hear that, and by the way, we all adopted that as siblings, And then
Well, of course.
And he
We
goes,
all adopt certain words, comments, behaviors from our parents. That's where we learned it, in the home, in the environment. It's learned, it's showed. It's not like they sat down and say, I want you to say that.
Sure.
It's just you see how it just evolves.
Sure, sure. Now, when you just to go back a little bit to your story,
Yes.
when you mentioned that you went to therapy right after you got divorced, right after you separated, you got divorced, therapy was not as accepted as it is today.
No, I would agree.
What was that? How did you decide to do it?
I knew I was suffering. I knew I was in pain. I knew I was sad. I knew I wasn't happy with myself.
Did you feel like you didn't have the tools to
I
manage
know I
that?
didn't have the tools, and I didn't have the support.
Right.
Because my parents would have been happy had I stayed in a relationship where there were all the material comforts.
Sure.
And none of the emotional ones.
I got you.
And that wasn't acceptable for me. But they didn't see that and they didn't understand it. And that was a real conflict. It took a long time for them to see what I was trying to explain to them for a very long time.
Right.
So, yes, I knew therapy helped unburden me of tremendous anger and frustration and disappointment and fear and guilt. I was a lot of guilt, because did I want this for my son and daughter? No. But truthfully, the man that this person became very abusive emotionally and verbally, and a couple of times physically. It wasn't a healthy environment, and there were other aspects to his personality that were very disturbing. So I know I made the right choice, but it was a hard choice. It was a difficult choice. So I couldn't feel good about it. So yes,
Sure.
I had to work a lot of things out in therapy. I continued in therapy. I put my children
Did you keep
in
it quiet?
therapy.
Did you keep it quiet, or you were out?
I was okay talking about it, because I realized I could see this as a life career for myself.
Sure.
But I agree. A lot of people are like, ooh, therapy, is something really wrong with you?
Yeah.
Rather than today, it's like, good for you.
Uh-huh.
Better you know yourself. Better you understand yourself. I think things have shifted, thank goodness, in a healthier, positive way, to see that therapy is beneficial. We all need to know ourselves, because if we don't know ourselves, we are going to make our lives a lot harder.
Yeah.
Because then we're not in touch with who we really are and what we like and what we want to do. And then we're at the mercy or the whim of either listening to someone else or just going around in circles, being lost and confused and unhappy or disappointed or seeking external pleasures or
to numb it,
or
which
to
is what
numb
we
it.
all do.
Yeah.
Everyone try. That's
Right.
I mean,
So
story as old as man.
or self-defeating, or yes, doing something very detrimental and hurtful. So to know thyself is very important.
I've felt. I mean, throughout. So I got it when I was in college. I went to a college upstate New York called Binghamton University, and the professor I got a. It was a little silly in hindsight, although I don't regret it. I got a creative writing and literature degree, and one of the reasons why was because I had this sense rather, that when I was talking to my professor, and I was talking to other people in the department, but there's one professor in particular that really I was very close with, that he seemed to embrace the full spectrum of life and its emotions, and would and love to capture it in writing or poetry or anything like that. And the first time that I did that, it was like an enormous boulder. It was just like lifted off my shoulders, where I just he taught about raw writing and honest raw writing, where I feel like lower than whale poop today, and nothing feels like it's gonna work out, and I'm tired. And I know that I've been a fighter for 20 years, 25 years, 35 years, whatever amount of time it is. I know I'll be okay. Today is just such a daunting day. And I've learned to do that, and it has been the biggest tool for my own self, sanity and health, for sure.
Well, what you're describing in a way is like journaling and really being in touch with how you're feeling in that moment. It's a snapshot. It's not how you always feel, but in that moment. And what cognitive behavioral therapy does, it helps transform and look at those unhelpful thoughts and feelings, like, oh, I feel like the lowest of the low, the worst.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all right, at that moment, that if you were to change that, what would you change that thought to? I can improve. I know this isn't going to last.
Yes.
I will feel better. I can make myself feel better tomorrow.
Yes.
And if you work on changing those thoughts, that will lift and change the mood, that can change your behavior and your actions. So it's getting a hold of what's going on internally.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way, you might have been doing your own cognitive behavioral therapy to help lift your own mood.
That's so, yeah. And it's funny because I always ended I'd write either letters or whatever. I'd always end it on a positive note. It wouldn't have to have a solution per se, but just a positive note. Today I know, I'll figure it out. I feel terrible. I figure it out.
That's hopeful. And so what you were doing, again, really was cognitive behavior, because you're looking at these unhelpful thoughts, because the thought is the antecedent. Then the feeling is what the next step.
Mm-hmm.
The behavior, and then, like, well, I feel unhappy, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm disappointed. And that leads to the behavior. It's the consequence of what goes on. And then to replace it by saying, all right, I know I'm not comfortable in my skin. I don't like where things are, but I can work on trying to figure out a new way to look at this problem, to approach my life, to figure out what do I need to do to help myself. And that's what, for instance, what a cognitive behavioral therapist might do, where and psychoanalytic therapy, and I went into analysis, and I do psychoanalytic psychotherapy because I think today most people don't have the time or the money or the expense to get into a 3 or a 4 very intensive type of analysis, but they want to understand there are unconscious conflicts. There are things that are beyond their awareness. They want to be able to lift those so they go from unconscious to conscious.
So how does that manifest?
The way it manifests in therapy is to talk it out.
Right.
That's talk therapy.
What if they don't, like, for example, I had one, realization years ago that part of like, I've always felt like I rejected, you could call it bureaucracy, but any kind of formal system. And that's obviously, and then while one day I was on a jog, it just hit me. The reason why is because I'd failed at it, that I had not been able to maneuver it or navigate it myself for many, many years. I did very poorly in school, I mentioned, before we started recording, and I was not a good test taker, and it was very hard for me. And even though I felt like I loved the information, I felt like I must have been, dumb to not do it. And so I got a disdain for it. I started hating, like people would say, oh, I go to Harvard. I'm like, oh, big deal, like that's just another bureaucracy.
I think what's unfortunate is you didn't have the right teacher. I think had you had the right teacher, or had they really understood you as a student, they might have realized that you might have had like mild ADHD and just preoccupied and really needed more time for test, or needed someone to help you understand the material in a way that you could have enjoyed it. Maybe it was just too strict, the teachers, and instead of working with you, it was like, oh, they don't care about me. Oh, the hell with them. I'm going to do my own thing. You went the other way. And to me, it sounds more like, instead of getting the help you deserved and should have had to help you grow, it shut you down or turned you off.
Well, I want
or
another
made
group.
you feel like you weren't smart enough when, given all the things you're doing, I would think you're probably very smart, but sometimes school is not the classroom, it shows the intelligence. You could be artistic, you're a creative writer, you're a thinker, your imagination, so you had to visualize it in order to put it on paper. And maybe they just didn't know how to capture that.
Yeah, but yeah, it's true, and it's probably the case. I think that what I was emphasizing was that I've gone out of my way to reject that system. I never
Right.
work.
Which
I
had to hurt you at times
Yes,
because by rejecting something,
I'm
it
closing that
was a
door.
way of saying, I'm not even going to entertain it, which closed you off from the opportunities or the
Yes.
possibilities of realizing that there were ways to work around it or with it. It's like there's a wall. All right, how are you going to get through this wall? You're going to break through it? You're going to go around it? You're going to dig under it? You're
Yeah.
going to climb over it?
Or you can turn
Or are you
around and
going to
just
turn
walk.
around and go back?
Yeah.
And that's part of life, and that's part of these unconscious conflicts or these repressed, impulses that we don't quite understand, but it's either uncomfortable or it seems too difficult, so I'm not going to bother. Or you find a way to defend against it by saying, who needs that? I don't need that.
Yeah.
I'll be better off without it. And so you rationalize or intellectualize and go in a different way. When had someone sat with you and say, all right, I know you hate this. I know you don't like this formal kind of learning, or it's very too structured or too strict. We have to find a way to help you grow and to learn.
Sure.
And so, but it puts you on a different path.
Definitely. Yeah, and I love the path. I mean, I'm not.
You've made adjustments, and you found your own way, and you teach and create, and you do podcasts. So you're finding your way, and you may still find new ways that you'll want to express yourself and be inventive and
Sure.
creative.
I want to find a way, I think, to just, and then we'll get back to, but I want to find a way, I think, to at least try and confront that,
And I think it'd probably be a good idea because you probably would make a very good therapist, or you might enjoy finding something where you could get a master's and then say, look,
Correct.
I have my master's in whatever it is, XYZ.
Yeah, and I know the challenge I had to go through and what I had to face in order
Yeah.
to be able to actually get myself through there. So you practice a lot of different types of
I
therapies. I was
have,
looking
and
at
I've been doing it over 30 years.
Yes.
So a lot of it has evolved over as I have evolved and grown, so has my practice. But like yourself, what I will say is whatever your passion is, whatever you love, whatever drives you, that's where you want to put your effort and your energy because that inspires you and you're willing to get up every day and say, I can do this, I love it, I enjoy it.
Yeah.
So, for instance, one of my other loves, besides helping children and families, was sports. I always was very active in
That's
the
what I'm
sports.
excited to get into. Yes, let's talk about
I
that.
mean, I grew up in St. Louis. My father was a gigantic sportsman. As a child, the St. Louis had everything. I went to 3 World Series for the Cardinals.
Sure.
The St. Louis football Cardinals before they went to Arizona were in St. Louis. Basketball, St. Louis Hawks before they went to Atlanta were in St. Louis. And the Blues are still there, the hockey team.
Wow.
So my whole life was surrounded by going to sporting events and learning to play tennis, which I loved. And when we moved here, I didn't make the team the first year in high school. I made it the second year. And what I realized, part of me realized, but it took a longer time to fully understand it. I love sports. I was a good athlete, but what I wasn't good at was being my own source of support, to really trust in my own abilities. So in this book, in my foreword, and I'll get to the book.
Yes, I'm so excited to look at it. Yeah.
My biggest enemy was me. My opponent was never on the other side of the net. It was I would doubt myself. I would shortchange myself. I'd say, "Oh, you can't. That player's better," or "You're not going to make it." And I would end up more often than not losing, not because the other opponent was better, but because I convinced myself I wasn't going to win, which was unfortunate. And it took me years and through therapy and the divorce to realize that. So when I was getting my internship when I was down working at Miami Children's Hospital. That summer, I ended up going to broadcast camp. I was going to send my son, but once I told his
What's
father,
broadcast camp?
back in the day, he no longer, sadly, he's passed away, but he was the play-by-play broadcaster for the Miami Dolphins. His name was
Cool.
Jim Mandich, and he created a week-long broadcast camp, mostly for kids, but some college students or married or adults took it because it was a way to get to meet every um, broadcaster, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and to learn the ins and outs of sports
That's
broadcasting.
so cool.
So, and I loved it. And like we broadcast a Marlins game, and we did a lot of fun things. But while I was sitting there listening to the broadcasters tell their stories, and this was back in the early 90s, it was like 94, I realized, broadcasting was getting very negative. It was all about trashing players, and the callers would call up, and everybody was very negative.
Mhm.
And I wanted to do something positive for students and parents.
Yeah.
So I was able to buy radio time. You can't even do it today, but
Sure.
on 790 AM, it's called Waxy. And so for 6 months, it's like buying a lease, like buying, an apartment. I paid for my radio time, and once a
No
week we had a
way.
1 hour show. I worked with over 40 students. At the time, my children were in high school, so I drew their friends from yearbook and debate and English and psychology, and they were all smart, interesting, young men and women that like sports. And also in this broadcast camp there were some students in like magnet programs and TV and radio. Sure. Broadcasting. So I worked with like I said, over 30 students. I had a host and a co-host. I helped craft the show. There were 4 segments to it. I had a role model segment where we would talk to rookies, because rookies could be like 18 or 19 or 20, sure. Just a few years away from these high school students. Sure. And hear their stories, or talk to back in the day, I talked to Butch Davis at the University of Miami, Shaky Rodriguez at FIU, I think just passed away in basketball, or we would talk to Dolphin rookies. We would go to the Lipton or to the PGA. And then I had.
How'd you get your foot in the door with all that? Were they just willing to, like, you just reached out? I just reached out. I love it. I just did it on my own. People don't do that so much these days, unfortunately. Taking a leap of faith. That's what I'm doing now. I guess so. Nobody paved the way, but I had the introduction to reading the broadcast. So part of me, I really did not know what I was doing. I really was flying by the seat of my Sure. pants each week. So I had a structure. So I had a role model segment, then I had a debate segment, and the debate segment was each week I would give the students the question, and they would debate it, because in high school, as you know, in adolescent development and Piagetian theory, it's about developing abstract thinking. It's thinking about ideas. It's not that one was right and one was wrong. It wasn't that I wanted one to win and one to lose. I wanted them to look at something from 2 different points of view and discuss it. Yeah. I do that with my students sometimes in high school, by the way. It's wonderful. I'll have them debate, and then I'll have them repeat the other person's argument, so to show that they understood what the other side was saying. Just to show that there can be more than one side, just to look at an argument. And I'm trying to think, what would I create today? Like, let's say, I don't know, we're like in the NBA playoffs. I know the Heat won last night. They got to play Friday. They got to, okay. Yeah. And maybe I'd have something like, well, what would you do? Let's say the Heat win and they go on and they're the 8th seed. How would you approach the series? Or what if they lose? How would you, so how would you approach the teams? I would just try to have them talk about something. It wasn't that I knew exactly how it was going to turn out. I wanted to hear their Sure. ideas. I wanted to hear what they had to say. Then I created a sports psychology mailbag. I made up a question like, I'm a high school athlete. I play tennis for my tennis team, but I find that I'm very anxious before the match. Or I'm a swimmer, and my team, they have me, doing the last, the rally, or I'm the anchor, and I'm always worried that I'm not going to be fast enough. So I'd help them talk about mental skills training or something else. Yeah. And then the last part, back in the day,
there was people did read the newspaper more, or they read the sporting news, and I had it called high five or low five. They had to tell me something really positive or something really negative that happened in sports that week.
That's an amazing
All
program.
right, yeah. So it was an hour show, and the parents could watch. I mean, like we were all behind the glass, and the parents were there. I ended up writing like 6 letters of recommendation for college. Most of them went into journalism or someone into sports broadcasting, someone into marketing. Um, and then after 6 months, I realized I was just getting off the ground with my own doctorate, and this was taking like 40 hours a week to do the 1 hour. I couldn't do it. It wasn't profitable enough. And even my husband at the time, who's now deceased, said, I think you better rethink this. But I loved it. So, I got to play. I got to do something fun. And then years later, I went back and I was teaching sports psychology at St. Thomas University.
Cool.
And I also, again, I had this idea, and I had written a paper. I wanted it to be accepted in a journal, but I knew it wouldn't be because the journal was very behavioral and my ideas were more psychoanalytic. So I knew they were going to theoretically decline, at which they did. But I thought of, well, what if I had a book that helps parents help their children create a rewarding and enjoyable youth sport experience? It's not about becoming a pro athlete. The whole book was about the relationship between the parent and the child.
Wow.
So I spoke to Ethan, who I met because I sent out an email and he happened to respond. And I started telling him, I just see this book. No one has ever written a book like this. And I could see it being so beautiful because I wanted athletes from the 60s when I was a child to like the early 2000s. I wanted men and women. So that's why it says over 100 accomplished athletes. But accomplished athletes, women that are in the Olympics, because I wanted swimming, track and field, golf, tennis.
The art of competition is not limited to just basketball.
Well, and it's not just men.
It's not just men, for sure not.
So
For sure not.
I wanted athletes of different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultures, but the most important thing I wanted athletes from different family structures.
Yes.
So I wanted athletes that grew up in a 2-parent home, a divorced home, a 1-parent home.
So great. You're really covering your bases.
Yeah. A parent could have been incarcerated, could have been raised by a grandmother, it could have been an aunt or an uncle. I wanted, again, the whole theme was about, I called it a winning tie, but we did, in the sense that the relationship really matters, to be heard, to have an adult listen to you, to be your source of support. And so the book is divided into 3 sections. It took us 4.5 years to write this book.
Really?
Because we ripped it up a few times. And
what was the process like?
The process, I thought it was going to be very stepwise and like sort of linear, and it ended up being more circular, which made sense. Ethan was right in that regard. Ethan was my co-author.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
But so the first part of the book is why play. What's play? Children are hardwired to play. You learn a lot about a child through the play, just because it's something they love to do, whether they're jumping or running or skipping, or they're going to all want to play, rolling a ball on the floor. You're interacting with your son or your daughter just through the sheer experience. And fine motor, gross motor, coordination, all these things evolve through play. So you want your child to play. It's fun. You want them to have fun. You want them to have the experience. And then when you get into organized sports around 5 or 6, up to age 12 or 14, let's say 14, then the second part of our book, the athletes shared all the life lessons they learned playing sports: accountability, discipline, respecting a coach, learning how to be a good teammate, dealing with adversity, coping with loss, being, sad about losing, and yet if your team won, to be happy for your team, but then how do you deal with your own feelings? And many more things that sports teaches you.
I'd love to read this book. This is a very, very cool concept.
And then the last part of the book has to do with cautionary tales, and the cautionary tales has to do with some of the athletes were starting to retire, or their own kids were getting into sports, and what they were seeing and their concerns. Like, for instance, let's say it's little league, whether it's like football or baseball. What if the kid didn't come to practice but wanted to be the star pitcher or the quarterback? Well, that wouldn't be fair to the other kids. But parents would try to do things like that. Or a professional athlete might have a daughter or son that liked art or dance, didn't want to do sport. That's okay too. Because it was all about listening and really being present with your child and showing up.
Yeah.
But showing restraint, not taking over.
Sure.
Because, like, let's say Little League basketball, if the parent is at the free throw line, how is a child going to shoot the ball? Or if the parent is up at the plate holding the bat, that doesn't help the child. The child has to learn.
Yes.
So they have to learn about their body. They have to learn how their body works. And if you look at
is it written from the perspective of the parent or from the child, or does it go back and forth?
No, it's really written for the parent.
For the parent, gotcha.
But I would say anyone in fourth grade on could read it. These are all the interviewed athletes, and you'll see the list. But as you'll see, a lot of them are short little stories. Some of my favorites, from Teach a Kid to Believe, or You Got to Have Failure.
Yes.
Like,
sure.
You have to learn these life lessons. Or Someone Was Behind Me. Udonis Haslem had a step.
Udonis Haslem, yeah.
All right, so you can.
Sure, I'd love to take a look. Yes, hang on. I'm sorry, I want to pause for just 2 seconds because my son just woke up. I want to just make sure that help him out of the house. Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. We're back. So we're talking about your book. We're talking about we're talking about sports or performance therapy, or psychology rather.
One of my girlfriends loved this book, and she happened to be on the board of PBS in Miami, and so we had meetings with them, and I was able to raise money nonprofitly, and they helped us, and we ended up creating interstitials, which are like little infomercials that ran in between the shows on PBS.
Cool.
And first they were 90 seconds, and you would see Ethan and I like, hello, like we're the co-authors.
So much fun.
Right. And then they cut them down to 60 seconds. You would hear our voice, but not see us. And this went on for a little over a year, and we would give talks at schools and libraries and children's museums. And honestly, we were getting, they really loved what we offered because they considered it evergreen. Because what these interstitials were was, how do you talk to your son after he lost or she, they lost their game.
Yeah.
So it was dealing with sadness,
so
coping with anger.
Examples? Like what are things that are good to say or obviously not?
Well, what would be good to say would be, I see you're really angry, your team lost, and you're really upset. But part of playing a sport, both teams can't win. And as long as you tried your best and your hardest and you gave it your all, that's what matters.
Right.
Did you have fun? You start out with, did you have a good time?
Yeah.
Because in youth sports, that's what it's about. It's not always about winning. And as long as you tried your best and gave it your best effort, because also what that would be instilling is intrinsic motivation. There's always external motivators, like, I'll take you for a cookie, or we'll go get ice cream, or you want a trophy. But the trophy, like, should children get a trophy? Well, from the ages of like 5 to 8, I think it's really nice. But after 8 years old, better they learn to focus on being the best athlete he or she can be.
Sure.
Because then it's they're not doing it really for themselves. They're doing it because they want something, and you want them to want it because it matters to them.
Yeah.
So.
Or maybe another good example, a question, I guess, that, maybe your thoughts on. I also I too used to struggle with, getting in my own head and performing. And I've noticed it's obviously for things that I don't feel 1,000% comfortable with, even though if I am comfortable, let's say, for example, on a scale from 1 to 10, public speaking, I'm like 8 or a 9.
Right.
I don't get in my head about that really. I didn't make the basketball team for I think 3 of the 4 years of high school. And it wasn't because I couldn't keep up with the guys. It was because the second that the coach showed up to tryouts, I'd dribble the ball off my foot, I'd airball free throws.
That was anxious. That was anxiety.
Right.
So what
do you
you're
do with that?
talking about, all right, so what you're talking about, and I'm going to get back to the anxiety in a minute. What's also in this book or integrated in this book, but you don't hear it per se, but it's there, is this book was very theoretically based. It was based on child development.
Sure.
And I took Eric Erickson's psychosocial theory, and I took the first 4 stages and I bumped them up into the years of youth sports. So his first stage, which is based on, birth to one, has to do with trust versus mistrust. Well, you have to bump that up into the first years of youth sports. As I said, you're giving your
Trusting
child,
yourself, you mean?
yes,
Yeah.
the bat or the basketball.
Sure.
They have to learn to trust themselves that they'll do the best they can. Whatever it is, they have to do it. They have to go out and be on, like I said, the free throw line, or if they're at the plate, they have to swing the bat. They have to throw the ball to see if it'll get into the net.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do it for them. So it's learning to trust your own body, learning to trust your own mind, telling yourself that you're good enough,
Yeah.
and that you can,
Yeah.
rather than the anxiety is the doubts. Oh, I don't think I can. Oh, that person was better. Oh, I don't believe in, I'm not that good. And it's learning to change that internal dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
I do it with athletes today.
Right. Because I think the Miami Heat, as you pointed out, they have for the last maybe 5 years or 6 years, they've had remarkable success with young players that no one seemed to have heard of,
Right.
that just seem to explode. And I don't know how closely or not you follow.
Well,
obviously,
they do have a sports psychologist on their staff.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah, they do. So,
I gotta get a hold of them.
Yeah,
I gotta get a hold of them
too. But so it's learning how to trust oneself.
You think it's a big? What percent you think that if everyone started to trust themselves, had the confidence?
I think you do better because if you have the skills, you know how to shoot, you know how to dribble, you've got good feet work, you have good hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
Then what's separating you from someone else at the same level?
Your head.
The not believing,
your head.
doubting.
Yeah.
It could be a split second, like, oh, I better pass the ball, or
Right.
oh, I better not shoot it, or.
And those thoughts are so fast. They're like lightning.
They're lightning fast, but those are thoughts that could keep you from being able to have made the team, or from showing the coach that you're capable.
Yeah. So what's the next step? So there was trust.
There's trust. After that, it has to do with autonomy versus shame, but it has to do with willpower. So shame is when someone's embarrassed or they're worried that they're not going to look good enough, or
Is shame internal or external? But
shame starts externally because someone says, "Look what you did," you weren't supposed to eat that cookie before dinner, and I see crumbs all over the kitchen, and you've made a mess. Well, they feel bad. They know they did something they're not supposed to do. But like on the sports field, let's say you miss the ball. There's a child's playing in the outfield. They have their glove out.
Yeah, it slips right through.
The ball drops out of their glove.
Mm-hmm.
They want to sink into the ground. They want to pull the cap over their head, and they want to disappear. Now, it wasn't anything terrible. What was terrible was what they heard. So if they heard, "What's wrong with you? How did you miss that? How did you not catch that ball?"
Yeah.
That's what creates shame.
I found that when I play basketball, one of the things that I consider myself a better teammate at this point than I do an individual player. But one of the best things I like to do is facilitate, and one of the things I've noticed is everyone reacts well. If someone misses an open shot, it's a perfect shot. Keep doing that again.
Exactly.
And I just keep on telling them, instead of yelling, "What are you going to miss the shot for?" If I just say, "Dude, if you took that 9 times, if you have 10 open shots like that, I want you to do that every time."
Well, you need to say that to yourself. You're good at telling others, but you've got to practice that with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
See, where guilt is more internal, it's one's, "I know I'm going to miss the ball. I know I'm not going to catch it. The glove is shaking." and they've already told themselves they can't do it, and they're already feeling guilty, like, "I know I'm not good enough."
Sure.
So it's already been
So
internalized.
shame is external,
It
guilt is
starts
more internal.
it starts external.
Mm-hmm.
Because no one wants to feel embarrassed or feel like I'm going to be told that I'm not smart enough, good enough, pretty enough,
Sure.
athletic enough. Where guilt is, they want to live up to a certain standard, but they're afraid they can't, or they've been told enough times, so I must not be.
Right. Right. Right.
So guilt ends up being more internal, but it's initially has to start externally, and then
so
it's
shame is almost like the root, and then guilt kind of grows out of that.
Right,
It's like the tree that grows out of it.
So getting back to
Yes.
developmental, with Erickson's psychosocial theory of trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame, industry, no, initiative versus guilt, meaning you've got to take that shot. You got to just try.
Yes.
And
That's
not
also
feel
hard.
bad. Like, oh, there's something wrong with me because I missed the shot.
I have to study this guy Erickson. I have to read his stuff because this is really
Eric
hitting home with
Erickson.
me.
It's psychosocial theory. Yeah. So, and then the last one is industry versus inferiority, and this has to do with 6 to 12. And industry versus inferiority has to do with like school learning and competence, meaning, industries you're learning about reading and writing and spelling, so you're doing things.
Yeah.
Inferiority, oh, you talk yourself out of it. I can't, I'm not good, I can't do it. But backing up to the third stage of initiative versus guilt, you sometimes have to have that willpower to persevere and to believe, or you just sort of implode.
Yeah.
You stop yourself because you feel like, no, someone told me I can't do it.
What is that? Why do we do that? Is it just fear of rejection? Is it?
It's a lot of things. Yeah, fear of rejection, fear of not being loved, fear of disappointing another, and we all go through it at different moments. These are universal. What he's taught, his is a lifespan model. And the one thing I love about Erickson is if you don't end up finding a way to maximize the lessons of that particular stage. You can always go back through therapy, through self-help, and find a way to help yourself overcome what was a weakness and turn it into a strength.
Right.
All right. And so it goes on from industry versus inferiority to intimacy versus isolation. These are like 20s and 30s year olds getting married, settling down, having a family. Today. Yes.
Massive problem.
And then generativity versus stagnation, which has to do with like if people in their 60s or 70s, if they don't find a way to either reinvent themselves or be productive, they stagnate.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't like my life. I'm not doing anything, and they get really depressed. Sure. And then the last stage is old age versus wisdom, where they have to find a way to integrate, because life is going to have ups and downs. There's going to be challenges and losses, and learn how to turn all the experiences of life into wisdom, into learned experiences.
Yeah.
Some people do, and they're good storytellers, and they make the best out of bad situations. And some people, it's like a dark cloud is just over them, and they're unhappy, and life is miserable, and they can't get out from underneath it.
There's a great one of my favorite Springsteen lines. I don't know if you're a fan, but he did that Broadway show, Springsteen on Broadway. It's on Netflix. And one of the great lines I think they ever came up with, he says, "We're either ghosts or ancestors to our kids."
Yeah.
And we're either like ghosts, like we're gonna haunt them, and when they're gonna sit and they're gonna, we're gonna haunt them day after day with our behavior, or we could be ancestors and be like the guiding light for them. And all of us have decisions, and it's such a beautiful way to put it.
But it's a beautiful way. It really is. And it shows you that there's always free will, and we have choices, no matter how limited our choices can be. And you think of someone like was it Elie Wiesel, who, in the face of just the worst possible situation, where hopelessness was understandable and reigned supreme, how to make sense of one's life and find meaning and purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, he was so astoundingly.
He was, and to be able that even in the face of staring at death, to say that life still has value and meaning and purpose, and not to lose hope.
Yeah, Yeah.
So it's very important. So I tried to integrate all these with Ethan, gave him the questions for the athletes, and then he would record the athletes' conversations, or they would share stories of their childhoods. Or
so he's a journalist.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Right now he does podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool. I'd like to maybe I'll introduce myself to him, reach out to him, and see.
Yeah, I have not spoken to him
in a bit. Okay.
and a number of years. Well, I don't care, but it's just he ended up creating a problem where we ended up not being able to keep going. The book ended up, not the book, but the vignettes were taken off PBS. He got into an altercation with his father when he was separated. And,
okay.
And so that kind of like truncated everything we were doing. Otherwise, these might have gone national.
Yeah. Well,
which is unfortunate, but we went pretty far. We did.
Well, if it's evergreen, then there's no reason why you can't make resurgences. I mean,
I'm trying to figure out how, and that's sort of where
podcasts.
Yeah,
podcast could be podcast could be the way to do it.
On that. So after that, and I that was a major loss, and then my father, and then my husband. So then I ended up doing more bereavement work, which has been very rewarding and very beneficial for me also.
I see. And when you say bereavement work, you're talking about personally, or you're talking about learning
personally, I had to go and work on myself to deal with my own losses and sadness and sorrow and heartbreak. And then once I understood grief in a healthier way and how to improve my own functioning, and that there could be another future, and to see that you can make meaning out of loss and still go on and find new happiness or love, I did some pro bono work for Jewish Family Services, helped with the bereavement group, and I still do bereavement work. And because everyone has loss at some point in their life.
What I think is so fascinating, one of the things that made me want to reach out to you in particular was because I feel like very few people, like a lot of people will get, I don't want to say it, people will specialize and choose a particular focus and stay on that. And I found it interesting. I found it fascinating. There's so many.
But I think for me, like you, there's so many things I'm interested in.
Sure.
And I think when you have a lot of, interest or ideas or creativity, you want to try to maximize it.
Yes.
I could have never foreseen how my career was going to go.
Sure.
It evolved out of my passions. And I think whatever you do, you want to do it because you have passions in these areas. Passions for interacting and getting to know people and understanding yourself and teaching and reaching out and helping others. And that's really what life is all about. We want to be able to help the next generation. We want to be able to help others and learn from our shortcomings, our mistakes, but realize we can transform them into new experiences that really benefit us also.
Sure.
So everything is sort of like a journey.
Can you give one example you think of a habit that everyone could implement to positively impact their performances?
Yes. All right.
Or one or two, whatever just off the top of your head.
Book, yes. One of my favorite chapters is you have to have failure. Everybody wants to win. Nobody wants to lose. But the reality is, you have to be a good loser in order to be an amazing winner. Because part of life is dealing with adversity, and not to fear it, but to be willing to face it. How often, say in a basketball game or a baseball game, for instance, or in golf, if you happen to watch the Masters this weekend, Rory McIlroy could have lost that match many times, but he came back and he won. And part of the reason I think he won is because he had lost other matches.
Yeah.
And in the end, in the playoff, he missed a putt on 18 he could have won. Sent him into sudden death. In sudden death, he ended up being victorious. Now, part of it, I do believe, was he had the mindset to say, look, I know what I did wrong, but I can't let that stop me.
Yeah.
I can still be okay and win, despite the fact that I blew an easy putt on 18.
That mentality, I feel like, is a muscle that you have to exercise. How do you exercise on a regular basis if I'm a regular person like myself?
Because we all have moments where we feel we
win or lose.
We shortchanged ourselves, or we didn't do as well as we wanted.
Yeah.
or gee, why did I double fault, or why did I, in tennis, or why did I lose that set? I should have beat that in my friend. I could have easily beat him and I lost, or in a pickup game, why did I let that person steal the ball? We all have those moments. And then afterwards you can say, all right, what could I do differently?
Yeah.
How could I approach it? Instead of berating yourself, like, what's wrong with me? I'm so mad at myself. I can't believe that I lost this because I made one, misstep, or I missed my free throw on the foul line. Instead, what can I learn? All right, let me go practice foul shooting for the next
So take
hour.
little risks.
Yeah, take
and
little
then
risks.
learn from when you lose. So
Yeah.
then by the time, yeah. But so there was Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if you
Oh
read his,
yes,
yeah,
the
amazing
anxious
book. Yes,
generation.
exactly. And one of
Beautiful
my
book.
favorite things that he wrote or was talking about was about the low consequence conflicts.
Yes.
Where where you as a kid, but I feel like also as an adult, you engage in activities that have low consequences where you can learn how to navigate them
Right.
for by the time it becomes bigger consequences, you already know how to deal with it, and I know, for example, please.
Yeah, and I was going to say for you to go back to school, not to have the mindset as I didn't like it and I didn't succeed, to say, you know what, I could see myself studying whatever it is. And I can try. I'll start with one class,
Yeah.
see how I do, see if it's enjoyable, and then maybe pursue the idea that maybe I could take two classes next semester, or I could go for a master's in such and such, or and maybe work with a therapist about how do I deal with the blocks that I doubt myself and I'm holding myself back from being able to succeed.
Gotcha. What do you think what have you found in your life, or some experiences that you feel like you've heard about but you didn't really get, or it didn't really resonate with you until you actually experienced it?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I think
Because I
that's
feel like that's a huge problem that people have, is that we try to, like, from a parent to a child, or from a child to a parent. My parents will tell me, like, oh, you don't get what it's like to love a kid. And I'm like, of course I get it. You're my parents. I love you, but like, until you're holding your own kid in your hands,
you
you
can't.
realize you have no idea what you're
You
talking about.
can't. You can only sort of imagine and sort of, like you say, I get it, but you don't get it until you have your own child. That's absolutely true.
Right.
There's no way around. There's no way that you could skip ahead and say, "Oh, I know what that's going to feel like." It's impossible.
Right.
It's like,
So what do you recommend people do when it
what I
comes to that?
recommend is not to fear the feelings, to be willing to take these risks, to be really, to say, I have to experience life. Say someone, oh, I want to be in a relationship. I want to have someone who loves me, but I'm so afraid of having my heart broken,
I've heard people are afraid to be alone. That's
or
a big
be
thing.
alone,
Yeah.
that I won't do it. But
Mhm.
honestly, the best thing one can learn is to be alone with oneself, to realize, what am I afraid of? This is me. I need to realize that I am enough, that I can take care of myself. And yes, it's nice to have someone I'm just saying me, I'm just
Yeah, I
using this
understand. Sure.
generically. Yes, it's wonderful to have someone in one's life, but you know what? You grow through adversity and through challenges and through difficulties. And even if the person who was afraid to be alone realized, all right, I was sad, I did cry in the middle of the night, but I realized afterwards what was so terrible. I read a book. I got to think about who I am and what I like about myself and what I want to improve on. And instead of focusing on making someone else happy all the time, or fear of disappointing someone, what's going to make this individual really feel proud of themselves?
Yeah.
So it stops them from really feeling very secure in themselves and their own capabilities. So, yes, I think we're very much caught up in, oh, I don't want to be alone. It'll be a stigma, or I'll be miserable, or I'll get depressed, when there's a lot of freedom.
Sure.
What about the other side? Oh, I can eat dinner when I want.
Yeah,
I
you
can
travel. You could
travel. I
move anywhere at the drop
right.
of it if you want.
If I'm tired at 10, I fall asleep at 10. But what if I feel like reading a book at 3 a.m. because I woke up and I can't go back to sleep? I'm not disturbing anybody.
Yeah.
So, by only looking at something one way, that's what's limiting, or being afraid that others will judge me, rather than, why focus on another person's opinion? Why not focus on respecting and valuing yourself?
Yeah. I think that one of the big things I've noticed that I really want to try and teach my kid, I think one of the most important things I could teach my kid is to be a self-starter and to, and to like
But you're
the
not
feeling
going
of
to
being
sit down
bored.
and teach them. This is something they'll
That's
see by,
influence, right?
right. Oh, look at dad. Dad, has been selling ultrasound equipment, and now dad is interested in going back to school. And look at dad staying home and reading all these books.
Yeah.
And, you're not doing it to show them how to be a self starter. This is part of your destiny. It's part of your future. So that's what you end up doing. I mean, when I went back to graduate school, a lot of times I would bring textbooks. My son was like on a baseball team, or my daughter was in a ballet class, and there were many times I felt like I really couldn't get to enjoy all the things they were doing because I had to study or I had to prepare for a
Sure.
test.
How'd you balance that?
I don't know, but I did.
Was it all a blur?
Yeah, it was all, looking back, it was all a blur. I
Yeah.
don't know how I did it, but you just do it.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking about how are my kids receiving this. I realized afterwards they saw their mother in school for most of their elementary, middle school, and high school years.
And how were they as students?
They were very, you know what, they were good, and then at the end, my son could have, he missed the bar by like a point, but I knew he didn't want to be a lawyer, so that is what kept him from retaking it, because he wanted to go up to New York and do investment banking, and that was fine. But you know what, they were smart enough to realize, let them pursue what they want, and I wanted them to pursue, their own careers.
That's amazing. It's really beautiful.
That's, I think, what's really important is giving them the freedom to say, look, I think this would be best for you, but if you really want to do this instead,
Right.
I'm not going to stop you, but let's look at the pros and the cons. And if it's still what you want to do, I'm going to support you because I love you. Versus, no, you must be a lawyer, or you must be a doctor, or you're going to be a wife, and that's just it, and just accept it.
Yeah.
Rather than, that forecloses them, when that may not at all be their career aspirations.
I've heard, I don't know, that we're just circling back to I guess and raising kids, and and um that giving them choices. Like, you might be authoritative and you might say, listen, you're going to be a healthy eater, but you can have your choice between chicken and hamburgers
Yeah.
and meatballs tonight,
Right.
and give them the sense that even though they're picking from a quote unquote menu, they've got license in that. They've got
Right.
like they've got the
They have a
freedom to
little bit of choice and agency, but then at the same time, I know you may not like this. It's green, it's
yeah.
broccoli or string beans, but one bite, just one bite.
Mhm.
Or they're playing, well, do you want to put your PJs on before your bath or after you brush your teeth? So they have like a little bit
Yeah,
of a
that's
choice.
yeah. And do you think that helps?
I do, because it gives them a little bit of a sense of agency. Oh, I'll do it after I brush my teeth.
Yeah, yeah,
So, yes, because if everything is you must do it this way, it's going to, it sort of sometimes can rob them of thinking on their own. And you don't
right.
want to rob them of feeling like they could make a decision, because then they feel, well, what do I do, Daddy? Well, tell me what to do.
That's
Versus
what indecisiveness comes from,
a
you
lot of
think? A lot of it?
times, yeah, because rather than it doesn't matter, but I want you to take a choice and just try it.
Yeah, yeah,
Because sure, it's understandable, they want to please your child, your son would want to please you, wouldn't want to disappoint you, would want you to be proud, but that's not what's going to make you proud. You're proud of him already. So if you say, well, do you want the cookie and then brush your teeth, or do you want to eat the cookie and then have the bath and then brush your teeth,
yeah.
whatever it is, but at least he could say, oh, I'll do it this way.
What are some new exciting things that are happening in psychology that you're excited about?
Well, you know what? I don't know if it's exciting or I'm more worried. I
Oh,
think it's
really?
more the other way.
In terms
More
of
like Jonathan Haidt, in the sense of where are our young children, school age through middle to high school, how are their brains being rewired by social
yeah.
media? I'm more concerned about the effect of social media on our young
Mm-hmm.
children, teenagers, young adults, because when I was growing up, I didn't know what the whole world was doing. I never even thought about it.
Yeah.
I might have known my little neighborhood or my friends at school,
Yeah.
but today, you know, what can happen online, there can be so much pressure, bullying, and people made to feel bad if they can't keep up with these airbrushed, wonderful visions of what some people can create on TikTok
Sure.
or Snapchat, and end up creating a lot of unhealthy, low self esteem or feelings of, why do I even bother living? Look what this person has. I'll never have anything like that. I'm more worried about the fact that our attention spans are so short.
Are you noticing more of this?
Yes,
You
I
know,
even see it with, yes.
you see, I see
My
it with myself.
grandchildren,
Yeah.
I love them, and they know more what's going on Snapchat or
Instagram or
Instagram
TikTok,
and
Twitter.
TikTok, and while it's fun and it's cute or interesting, but I want them to read. I want them to realize that that's not everything. It's looking at what someone else is doing
Hmm.
or wanting to make their own TikTok. But in essence, what is really TikTok? It's doing something fun or creative, but yeah, maybe it becomes something one day. I don't know.
Right.
But I'm more worried about these 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 short bits of focusing their attention on something and not being able to sustain it
Hmm.
for long periods of time,
Right.
or
Yeah.
things along
Do you
those
notice the
lines.
correlation between diet and and mental health?
Well, I think there is. I think, we're a very, look what's happening with the explosion of these diet pills like, Ozempic
Yeah.
and some of these other ones, the millions of dollars they're making because we're a culture of people want to look a certain way. They want to be admired for their body. They want to, be perceived as attractive
Hmm.
instead of looking at the whole person or their heart or the kind of character they have. I think there's too much emphasis on the external. That's part of even my concern with some of these TikTok.
But I'm referring to the food that we
Oh,
consume.
that too. We live in a instant. People. I think there are people that are really getting back to wanting to eat healthy, and cook, and eat more fruits and vegetables,
Yeah.
and eat better for your health and for your diet. But then we also live in a generation. If you go to, if you've been in Disney World lately or Universal, and you look around just at the people
It's
that are
sad.
walking around, I would say 40 to 50% are overweight.
Right. So do you think, is there a
Wouldn't you?
correlation?
Wouldn't,
I think probably, if not more, but
if not more,
because I don't
because
know what overweight means because it's all relative, right? Because comparing someone to in a wheelchair to someone that's 30 pounds overweight,
I know, but
they're
is
both
it,
overweight, but
they're
you wouldn't
both,
even think that they're but
but
necessarily, I
is
think it's
it
probably closer to
because,
70 or
is it
80%.
because they're not eating nutritious foods, they're eating fast foods more? Is it a financial consideration, or is it because they want to do so many other things
But do
they
you think there are
haven't?
mental health repercussions from that?
Yes, of course I do.
Like what, for example?
I think with obesity, feelings of low self-esteem, not fitting in, being ostracized, being bullied,
Yeah.
I
Anxiety.
think
Yeah.
anxiety, depression, all of those, cutting, yeah, I mean, it could lead a real slippery slope. I think the other thing that worries me is that people can hide behind the screens and bully others.
That's something that I found myself.
Anonymously, they can say something that's very hurtful.
I found myself on the receiving end of that one time by accident. I was on Twitter,
Yeah.
and there was a post about, and completely politics aside, completely apolitical. There's a post that an actress um, had been dropped by her agents because she criticized the war in Gaza.
Okay.
And so I responded to that. I said, just like the actress has a right to emphasize to decide her opinion on this. The agents have a right to decide who they're gonna work with or not, right? I don't think that anyone like is right or wrong in this. I think it's just a matter of free choice, and that's it. And it was Variety had posted it, and they posted, let's say, a minute or two earlier, so there weren't a ton of comments yet. So what people were seeing was my first comment, and I got attacked. And I remember thinking that it was a totally new experience of anxiety and a totally new experience of checking my phone and deep concern as to like what I was about to read. people say the craziest
the
things.
cruelest, and you don't know where they're coming from or their beliefs. We've become a very polarized society.
Yeah.
And that's what's really sad. Instead of getting to listen or understand why a person might have that point of view, it's like they're wrong. They should be ostracized. It's terrible that
Right.
it has become so vitriolic and very black and white instead of nuance
Sure.
or
Because it
understand.
gets rewarded by the algorithm. The vitriol gets rewarded because
Yes,
it's
it does.
engaging.
Exactly, because it creates something, this fur of more people want to hop on and comment and pile on and add more hurtful or unsavory comments that are just so disturbing.
There's a book I'll send you the link to. It's by the first time I ever heard of it. I read the book in college. I have to revisit it, I think. But it was by a cyber psychologist named Dr. Mary Inken. I think she's Irish. And it basically went. I forgot the name of the book. I remember her name, so I'll find it. But it goes through the impact of technology and screens and social media and stuff on from the time we're born to the time till we're adults.
Look,
And it talks about all this
the
stuff.
world has changed. Your children, my grandchildren, they're digital natives. They grew up with screens. They grew up knowing. My grandchildren know how to use the phones better than I do, or how to
My
find
son
apps. Yeah,
already
they know how to
knows how to do
swipe.
the swipe. It's the
They already
craziest
know how
thing.
to swipe. It's a
It's
different
true.
world. Their brains are going to be hardwired differently, and I
So
just hope
what
they
gives you hope?
can. Well, I think what you and your wife are doing by the importance of religion in the home, having family, friends, connection, communication, not just through, looking and
Yeah.
talking to a phone, but I think having the structure, having faith, having family meals, sitting around talking, getting to know others, sharing stories, not feeling isolated or alone, because we don't know how many people they could have 1,000 likes or TikTok videos, but you don't know how isolated or
Sure.
alone. We don't know.
It's a classic figure, the stereotypical figure of the guy in their mother's basement, that has all those followers, and he's yelling, "Mom, give me another sandwich," while he's off preaching to the internet world.
So I think the importance of being able to be with other human beings, to understand facial expressions and
Sure.
feelings, and to be able to talk to people. Today, kids will send a text, but a text doesn't, they could misinterpret the text and then be angry at someone for what the text said when maybe the text didn't mean it, but you're only having a word. A text doesn't have a feeling, but people attach the feeling to the word because they know the person, but it doesn't always match. Or
Right.
they make assumptions.
Yeah.
And that's how
Embodied experiences, I
Yes.
think, are very valuable.
I think they're very valuable.
Yeah. What do you think? What about religion in particular? Because I feel like for a long time, at least the last 10 years, it was considered like the R word. Like it was considered like a bad word. No one could say they believe in God. No one could
I
say
think
they're
it's very
religious.
important, but that's my view. And I think whatever I have friends that are not Jewish, and I am Jewish, and I
Sure.
have many friends
Me
who
too.
are.
Yeah.
And I think if I find bringing for myself beliefs from my religion into the way I live my life with kindness, with integrity, with compassion, try to be understanding.
So you think it's good? It's good guidelines.
I think the virtues that are inherent in our religion is so important.
I feel
The
like it's
prayers, when you deconstruct some of the prayers and what they mean, and to be able to live the message, I think it's vital.
Yeah, I think it's about the presentation. Because there was a generation of, the famous expression of Jewish guilt, that everyone in the world knows, But I have a friend of mine who I'm very close with. He's my father's age, so in his mid-50s. And and he and I were, talked, we're very close, and we have very real and open and honest conversations. And one of the things he talks about was when he was younger, how he wasn't observant because he was like, my teachers would just scream that like we're gonna suffer when we're bad and we're gonna burn in hell. And he's like, what is that garbage? He's like, and I teach my kids to just like I just love just to teach out of a position of love.
Well, I agree. recall my growing up years at Sunday school were scary. They
Yeah.
were not happy or exciting or encouraging me to learn about my religion. It seemed dark and foreboding. And I live in Boca, and my synagogue is a Reformed synagogue in Boca. What they do with children is so engaging and so much fun and so uplifting. And I'm like, oh.
That kind of gives me hope. It gives me hope that despite a generation or multiple generations, of people that have maintained their relationship to religion out of something negative like guilt or fear or shame,
Right.
and that it could somehow emerge that it's becoming more positive, and that it's becoming more loving, and it's becoming more warm. It's very beautiful.
I think it really is. I think for a long time we didn't see it or hear about it in the same way.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't taught.
Yeah.
With the same open.
So it comes back down to teaching. You said you taught at
St. Thomas University.
How'd you like teaching?
I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah.
I really did. The hard part, in all honesty, was it was like 6 to 10, and I was living in Lighthouse Point, and it was over an hour away because it was in Miami. It was by Biscayne College, St. Thomas University, off the Palmetto.
Okay.
So, and I taught two different groups. It was either the attorneys who did entertainment and sports law. So sports psychology was like an elective, or the counseling therapist, or it was English as a second language, but it was again an elective. And what I did, which I thought was interesting, and in the end they liked it and they wanted me to stay, but I really wanted to write this book. When I did my finals, the textbook was very thick. It was several hundred pages on the principles and theories of sports psychology, but I would give them real world examples and want them to integrate what was in like 2 or 3 chapters. There wasn't necessarily a real right or wrong. I wanted them to use their mind to think, how would you apply it to this situation?
I can see why they would like you. That's great. It's the best way to learn.
Right. And some of them did, but the ones that never read the chapter were struggling because then all of a sudden, how do I understand how to make sense of this question?
Mm-hmm.
But I felt if I don't give them skills for how to think on their own 2 feet, then am I really teaching them? Anybody could read a book on sports psychology, a chapter on anxiety, a chapter on motivation, a chapter on focus, a chapter on concentration. But I had to integrate it into like a real life example, and they thought it was very interesting. So I was very proud of the 4 years that I taught there. But then my dream was to write a book. And it just took a lot longer to write the book because Ethan's schedule, he'd be traveling with, could be the Marlins or the Heat or the Dolphins. I'd be working. I mean, he would try to interview someone. He'd send me the tape. I'd transcribe it.
Wow.
It was like a patchwork quilt, what we created. But it integrated, and I was with him in writing every single, word because I understood the psychology of child development and the interactions that I wanted the parents to hear. Because I wanted the parents, and you could take this book as a gift. I wanted the parents to use this as a way to encourage and enhance their relationship, not shut it down or just try to make their child feel bad if they weren't an outstanding athlete.
Yeah, certainly. It's such a cool, it's such a novel and cool combination of authors, between, please.
Right. No, you were right. He's a journalist. I'm a psychologist.
Yeah.
But we wove our 2 passions together, and he also loved sports. He knew the athletes. He didn't know their childhood stories, so they were able to tell us their childhood stories without it being a whole complicated, unruly way of because you had to get all these waivers and clauses that we could talk to them, and he could talk to them about things that had nothing to do with their performance on the field at that moment.
Sure.
So that's how he was able to sort of get around it.
Yeah, get that deeper connection.
Yeah.
So you taught, practiced, read a book, Anything? What else are we missing? Radio shows, certainly.
Groups, bereavement groups.
Bereavement groups.
Anxiety groups.
How is that different from? I guess because that's more of a group setting as opposed to one-on-one therapy.
Yeah, well, what was really helpful with the bereavement, and this group ended up being online, and you'll love this story. We were online for 2 years. We met once a week. There were about 15 of us. And over time, I would say over half the group either ended up in a relationship with someone else. They met a new love.
Wow.
And these are individuals in their 70s and 80s.
Sure.
Or there were two that ended up starting to date from our boxes on Zoom. It's learning how to process the loss. It's really being able to sit with the deep pain and heartbreak and not be afraid to cry or to talk about it.
I feel like a lot of people have guilt. Like, my grandfather would never. My grandmother died when I think she died in her mid-50s. She was pretty young. My grandfather died in his early 90s.
Oh,
And maybe she was in her early 60s. I don't know. But either way, it was like 20, 30 years, 20 years, 25 years that they were apart. He didn't go on a
which is
date.
unfortunate because he felt like he couldn't disloyal her.
Yes, he said, and he always referred to my wife. He said, is my wife.
Rather than, yes, she would have always been his wife, but why deprive himself the joy of having met the potential of another woman who he could have also shared his life with, gone to movies, cooked dinners, celebrated holidays, shared simchas of their families, and didn't feel so alone or alienated. The guilt kept him from being able.
I think a lot of it is guilt. A lot of it feels like you're cheating, or a lot of it feels like you're betraying. You're not.
Who's deceased.
Yeah.
Because if they were there, it would be cheating.
Yeah.
But they're not there.
Yeah.
You can't bring them back.
Yeah.
And so you have to be willing to grieve, mourn the loss, have all the sadness and the crying and the heartbreak, but also say at some point, I have to move forward and I have to take care of myself. And maybe taking care of myself is realizing if the thing about individuals who've lost loved ones, they often find new love because they have been blessed with love, and they don't want to suffer and just be unhappy and alone. They want to re-experience love again or share their life with someone. May or may not get married, different life, but at the same time, why should they be prohibited from enjoying experiences together?
Do you think that having like a close family, for another example, is my wife's grandfather passed away, and my wife's grandmother's young. She's in her mid-60s, and she moved, and she has, out of 3 kids, 2 of them live on the same block, and they have like 4 or 5 kids each. She moved to their block,
of course,
and she would never consider the notion, but what she has now is she's next door. She looks out her window. She's her grandkids playing. She looks,
For some people, that's enough.
Yeah.
For some people, that's adequate, and that's all they care about.
Because they're getting that sharing and that connection.
They're experiencing and seeing joy through their grandchildren. They're cooking for them. They're having meals with them. But if you ask them, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and you're home alone, in your home, would you ever wish you could be with someone again? And whether you're watching a movie together or a TV show, playing a board game, listening to music, do you ever wish that you could have someone to share that with?
Yeah.
What do you think their answer might be?
Certainly, the answer is yes, but. It's always the answer.
But
yes,
it's the but that holds them back rather than, yes, I do, but I'm afraid, or I'm afraid I'll be rejected by my family, or I'm afraid I'll be ridiculed because I'm not supposed to. Well, what's the not supposed to? That is an expectation that has been put in their mind that they will be doing. Like you say, they're going against sadly, their deceased spouse. They're not doing anything horrible. They're not harming anyone. The person they're really harming is themselves. because they're not allowing themselves to live. Instead, they live in this twilight world of, yes, I'm alive, but part of me doesn't want to live because how can I go forward when I lost my spouse?
Yeah.
And so unless they're willing to realize that they can continue living, that you don't know how long you're going to live,
Yeah.
and you don't have to foreclose
Yes.
your life, then there is the possibility for joy. But if the fear is, my family will be angry, how can I bring a stranger into my family when this is all they've known, then they're not allowing themselves that freedom to take that chance that it would be okay.
Yeah. There's a great line from one of my favorite movies, Saving Mr. Banks. I don't know if you remember that movie. Tom Hanks and Emma Thompson. And one of the things that he said when he was figuring out that she was kind of holding herself back the whole time, he's like, life's an awfully harsh sentence to hand yourself.
Well, thank you. That's perfect. So that's exactly what it is. They've made a decision, and they made the decision, I won't date.
Yeah.
I won't meet someone. I won't allow myself to fall in love.
It's a sentence. You're sentencing yourself. I won't
allow myself to fall in love again. So, in essence, there may not be prison bars on their home, but in essence, they've created them because they're not giving themselves the opportunity to enjoy love, to have friendship. What if they could travel with someone? What if they could experience that other person's family and have a home cooked meal? But they're saying, no, I can't do it.
Yeah, the guilt. I can imagine. I can imagine.
But that's self-imposed.
Yeah.
Guilt is very powerful. Guilt is punitive. Guilt can be just crushing and crippling.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be. Because if she could be freed, hypothetically, let's just make it imaginary. If this woman who is a widow or a widower could say, I deserve to still enjoy I had 50 wonderful years with this woman, or 45 amazing years, but do I deserve to cut myself off and never live again? I'm going to say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm in that same situation now. So, in fact, today is 7 years since my husband passed away.
Sorry.
That's all right. Today.
Wow.
I will go to temple tomorrow night. I lit a candle this morning. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
well, keep in mind. Say prayer for him.
Does it mean that I should not have another relationship?
So what do you? No. So what do you do yourself?
I did date someone, and I ended up breaking up with them 9 months ago because I realized they weren't emotionally available, and it happened on the day my mother died.
Oh boy!
It was tough.
Heavens. Yeah.
That whole weekend between her death and the funeral, and it was like a veil was lifted. All of a sudden, I saw that this person wasn't emotionally available, and I'd rather be alone. And it hasn't been an easy year, but I'd rather be alone and learn how to be my own best friend than be with someone who didn't treat me with the kindness. That's why I think kindness is the importance and love that I deserve.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's.
So that's
I'm sure every day. I'm sure there are
now.
good days and I'm sure there are good days and bad days.
Absolutely.
Wow.
But
sorry.
that's okay. That's all right.
I know it is.
Journey.
I know it is.
This
of course. But it hurt. It still hurts. You know. Of course.
But this is my journey. Everyone has a different journey.
Yeah.
Most of my friends are still married. I have a few that are widowed. Some divorced, but the majority, I'd say 9 out of 10, are still married, and I'm happy for them. I only wish them the rest of their lives to be married. But you know what? We all don't get to choose our fate.
No.
I didn't choose that. I didn't want to be divorced or separated 27 with a 1 and a 3-year-old, and divorced 2 years later with a 3 and a 5-year-old. I was lucky to remarry. We had a beautiful marriage. Well, it wasn't always easy. There were challenges with his stepchildren and even my children. But for me, he was very good to me. So I have to look at the good. I have to weigh the bitter and the sweet. Isn't that Passover?
Yeah. We have that blend. That's right.
We have that blend, and part of life is learning to live with the joy and the happiness and the sorrow. and learning to make the best of it. And we eat that Moro sandwich
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
roasted
yeah.
and and the horseradish. And we have to know that life is a combination of happiness and love and joy and sorrow
Pain
and pain and
yeah,
suffering.
yeah.
But it's learning to find a way, in spite of that,
Mm-hmm.
to move forward. So that's what I would say, even for the widow, the widower could be in their 70s. I've
Yeah,
seen people in their 80s
yeah.
make new relationships. And why not?
Sure.
Why not? I saw my mother do it in an assisted living for a few years.
Beautiful.
Which
Yeah, I
I
mean,
thought was because,
it is.
loneliness can be very crippling.
Yes, yes. I think I think that it might be the biggest problem that young males
I think young
face
males
today.
and older males and older females and senior citizens face. I
Yes,
think if there's
loneliness.
anything that senior citizens face besides financial insecurity or food insecurity, has to do with loneliness. Say they're estranged from their family or their family lives thousands of miles away. Today, many families are not on the same street. They're separated. They could be separated by oceans. They could be separated by
Sure.
continents. And to be all alone can be very painful and very hard. Even if you could be connected through FaceTime,
Yeah, it's not the same.
it's still not the
It's not
same.
the same as
It's not the
embodied
same as
experience.
connection and touch.
Yes.
Touch is vital. And I think especially for older people,
Mm-hmm.
they need to feel that someone hears them, someone listens to them, whether they hold their hand or not, but you need that connection.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask last question,
Okay.
and then we'll call it. Just based on this conversation and kind of blossoming from it, do you think that there are particular experiences that a group session is better to deal with psychological problems?
Yes, and bereavement was one of them. Anxiety could be another one because you realize you're not alone. Someone will
Right.
start to share a story,
So do you think
and you'll say, "Oh, that's me. I went through that.
right?
I had
So
something
that's what people say
similar."
is so valuable about like AA or NA or anything like that is that you have this sense of community. But and I've also found, by the way, the reason one of the ways I got started in podcasts because I have a friend that started a mental health podcast years ago, maybe 5, 6 years ago, and other people that he had on were my friends, and they would talk about these experiences. And I was like, I had no idea that you were experiencing that, but I was also at the same time, and all we had to do was just be there together and talk about it.
You don't feel as alone. You realize that, first of all, we're hardwired for anxiety. Anxiety is part of our survival. It's a tool. But if you go back to the caveman would stand at the edge of the cave and he'd see the saber-toothed tiger.
Sure.
Well, you're going to fight it and get your club and try to...
Or imagine a scenario
Or you're going to flee
Yeah.
and you're going to run back in. So part of it is we're hardwired. The problem is there aren't the saber-toothed tigers anymore. And so we end up creating our own fears.
Mm-hmm.
And our own fears can hold us back just as much as a realistic one.
Probably more.
Probably
the only thing
more.
stopping ourselves, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
The fear of rejection.
So
The
you think
fear
that
of
group?
criticism.
I don't hear so much about group therapy. I feel like that would be
It's
so
still there.
beneficial.
It is, but you know what? It happens in settings where you can bring in a group. You have to be able to have the structure that you have enough people that can sign up, enough people that can participate, enough people.
Well, if you start, I'll join. If you start one, I'll join it.
I mean, there are centers. I did one years ago for the Center for Anxiety Disorders.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling.
And then this therapy sessions would be with groups of, group of people, and then you have a therapist, and everyone
you have a workbook, and you do the workbook, and you talk about what it was.
I wonder how much more. I wonder how the effectiveness, what the effectiveness is that versus one-on-one.
I think it can be very effective, and then you could always, after whether it was 8 week or 10 week or 12 weeks, then if you had areas where you were still struggling, then go into something individual. But you need to be in a setting that offers the structure that could provide the materials, the room, the chairs, the therapy, charge a very nominal fee, like a Jewish Federation or Jewish Family, or
anything.
Something, some mental health organization. I'm sure they offer it. You just have to ask because it's out there. It's out there.
I would like for it to be more. because I didn't even think about that. I never even thought about the potential benefits of a group
And you
therapy
could do
session
it in a
until right now.
school. You could do it in a
Sure.
school in the evening. Set up the chairs in a circle, and you could put up a flyer and say, or you knew a therapist who said, I'd be willing to, I need a minimum of 6 people. They
Yeah.
pay $10 a session. It's not that hard. Anyone could start it.
That's a really cool idea. I think we'll leave it with that. That sounds fair. Thank you so much for all the
My
time. Thank you
pleasure.
so much for
It
coming
was
coming to
lovely
the house.
meeting
It's
you
so
and
lovely,
talking
and I
to
hope to stay
you.
in touch. Maybe we'll do
Yeah.
another episode again,
Okay.
and maybe I'll try to teach you a good start yourself. Thank you
Right.
so much. Bye, everyone.